We're looking at the life of David. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 8. I'd encourage you to open your Bible with us. 2 Samuel chapter 8. David, in the previous chapter, desired to build God a house. And Nathan the prophet, who really was just responding out of David's desire. He's saying, God's been with David all of this time and he wants to build him a house. I'm sure God will bless that. And he just gives him the go-ahead. And that night, Nathan goes home and God speaks to him and says, you know what? God, David's not to build me a house. That's not his task. That's not his job. David's told why, because he was a man of war and he had shed too much blood, that his son would be the one building his house. And so David now, understanding God's plan for his life, and it seems in chapter 8 that he now goes on the offensive. He realizes, my job isn't to build a house, my job is to establish the kingdom. And we're going to see for the first time, David and the nation of Israel had been on the offenses with the Philistines ever since they had got into the promised land. But now David begins to change the course of that, and now he's going to take ground. Notice what happens in chapter 8. It says, after this came to pass, that David attacked the Philistines, subdued them. David took Metheg-Ammah from the hand of the Philistines. Now remember, the Philistines were constantly harassing the children of Israel. It was like their arch enemy. Anytime the children of Israel would do anything, the Philistines would attack. And now David's attacking them. And I wonder if some clarity didn't come into David's life as a result of that conversation with Nathan. And then God saying, David, I'm going to build you a house. You're not going to build me a house. And I'm going to establish your house forever. There was something transpired in the heart of David. He's like, you know what? I'm going to do what God's called me to do now. And he's going to begin this ridding of all of the enemies of God. Notice as he goes down this, look at verse 2. Then he defeated Moab, forcing them down to the ground. He measured them off with a line. With 2 lines he measured off those to be put to death, and with 1 full line those to be kept alive. So the Moabites became David's servants, and they brought tribute. Now they're paying taxes to David and to the nation of Israel. It says in verse 4, or verse 3, and David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, the son of Zobah, as he went to recover his territory at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,000 chariots, 700 horsemen, and 20,000 foot soldiers. Also, David hamstrung all the chariot horses, except that he spared enough of them for 100 chariots. Interesting that note would be brought into this passage. David's just going through and he's getting rid of all of the threats, all of the enemies that have been trying to kill the children of Israel for years now, for generations now. And he just, one by one, just routing them, just demolishing them. And then the scripture says, and he took 1,000 chariots. A chariot was like a tank in that culture, in that day. You had chariots, you had a strong army. And David somehow defeats 1,000 chariots and takes them from Hadadezer. And what's interesting, it says that he hamstrung all the horses with the exception of 100. And it was God who had instructed them not to put their confidence in an army or in the power of a horse or in the power of a chariot, because their confidence was to be put in God. That God was their defense, God was their protector, God was the one that was going to sustain them. David would write in one of the Psalms, in Psalm 20 verse 7, David says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. And the reason he had hamstrung all of the horses, because we're not going to put our confidence in the power of a horse or in the power of a man. We're going to put our confidence in the power of God. And guys, that's you know, what a great reminder for all of us. You know, there's no amount of you know, strength or money or success that's ever going to, you know, make you content or is ever going to, you know, guarantee your security or safety. Your security and safety is only guaranteed by the Lord. And if you're trying to put your confidence somewhere else, then you're really put yourself in a vulnerable place because you're putting something else above God. And David was guarding against that. You know, he hamstrings all these horses. I mean, all they can do is now give kiddie rides. They couldn't go to battle. They couldn't go to war. They can use them in the carnival. But they could never use them to go out and defeat the enemy anymore. It wasn't their trust wasn't going to be in horses or in chariots. And David, you know, would declare that here. You know, we'll keep 100, just kind of, you know, a small contingency of what they were capable of. And then notice verse 5. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadazer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of the Syrians. And David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became David's servants, and they brought tribute. Now notice he's just gaining more territory. It was the territory that God had already given the children of Israel generations before when Joshua had led them into the land, but they had, you know, never gained that territory. Matter of fact, they were declining in the territory that God had entrusted to them. But now David, you know, expanding the kingdom, you know, taking the land that was already afforded them, given to them, the covenant that God had made with Joshua, with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And now, and it's interesting, the end of verse 6, it says this: so the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Now, notice who's getting the credit for all of the victories that were taking place. It wasn't David. It wasn't David's great ability or David's great skill or David's great power or David's great might. It was the Lord that was preserving him. God was protecting him. And he's aware of that. He's very attuned to, you know, everything that's happened up until this point is because God has done it, because God has sustained us. And what a great, you know, reminder for all of, you know, whatever blessings you have in your life, man, you understand God's the one who provides those. And David was very aware of that it wasn't something that he had accomplished. Now, look at verse 7 now. He says, and David took the shields of gold that had belonged to the servants of Hadazer, and he brought them to Jerusalem. Also from Betah and from Berothah, cities of Hadazer, King David took large amounts of bronze. Then Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the armies of Hadazer, and Toi sent Joram as his son to King David to greet him and to bless him because he had fought against Hadazer and defeated him. For Hadazer had been at war with Toi, and Joram brought with him articles of silver, articles of gold, and articles of bronze. Now, it's interesting, in the days of David, gold was in abundance. Silver was, in a couple of passages that tell us, silver was like the rocks in Jerusalem. Now, you ever been to Jerusalem? You know, it's kind of like Tomei. When you drive around, you kind of think around and go, man, I feel like I'm at home. You know, you're cruising around Jerusalem, you saw these little hills, and you feel like we're in the middle of the desert. It feels like we're in the Rio Grande Valley. But what the reality was, in the abundance of everything during David's reign. Everyone was bringing him tribute. You know, the gold, the silver from all of the the victories and all the wars that he had fought, and it was just accumulating and accumulating, and they were, becoming more and more prosperous and more successful, and the gold was in abundance, and the silver was common in the land. God was prospering them. God was blessing them. And it's interesting in verse 11, it says, and King David also dedicated these to the Lord, along with the silver and the gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued. I mean, David had a right perspective. He had gained all of this wealth. He had gained all of this favor. He's got all of these things going on, just the treasury was just overflowing. And he says, and David dedicated all to the Lord. Now, if you remember, last week we looked at a little bit, David begins to accumulate a lot of that stuff so that he would leave it to Solomon so that Solomon could build the temple. Because David wasn't about accumulating for himself. He wanted to further the kingdom. He wanted to expand, God's influence in the culture that he was in. And so he dedicated all of these things that he had subdued. Look at this. Look at verse 12. It tells him where he had gathered that stuff from Syria, from Moab, from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines, from Amalek, from the spoils of Hadazer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David made himself a name when he returned from killing 18,000 Syrians in the valley of Salt. David made himself a name. In other words, the name of David was becoming famous. Everyone knew when you said the name David, everyone, the name never been used before, never been named before, but now his name was prominent. They knew who exactly the king of Israel was. And I think when you start to make a name, it's when you're in a very dangerous position. When you start to become that popular and that wealthy and you got that much influence, that's when humility, has to be something that you're pursuing after and holding on to. Remember, I'm nothing. It's all God. I didn't earn it all. I didn't do it all. It was God who blessed me. It's God who gave me this stuff. And the more prosperous we become, the more dangerous it becomes. Because the tendency for us is to think that it's because something we did or because of our great wit or because of our great power that, we're able to do whatever, we accomplish. And David at this point is in that place of humility. It's going to change, down the road. You're going to see David kicking back, thinking, I did my job. I already, accomplished all that I need to accomplish. And he's sitting at home, and that's when he falls into sin with Bathsheba. He sees her from afar, and he thinks, what, I deserve that. I've been working hard. I get a little break, right? But at this point in David's life, he's still, charging. He's still after it. He knows that God's the one who provided everything and God's the one who sustained everything. Look at verse 14. He also put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all of Edom, he put garrisons. All the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Did you notice that's the second time the scripture reminds us of that? And the Lord preserved David wherever he went. And when it's repeated in the scripture, it's not repeated by accident. It was a reminder that, God's the one who's doing all of this. God's the one whose protection and perseverance is coming from. That this is a God thing. This isn't a David thing. This is the Lord who's providing and protecting and watching over David wherever he went. And every battle that he went into, God protected him. And then in verse 15, we get David's cabinet. We get all of his men that he had put into positions. Look what he says. David reigned over all of Israel. David administered judgment and justice to all of his people. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. One commander, Joab. Joab took care of, all of the different branches He had, Marines, Army, Air Force. Joab had it all. What a way to save money. You just get one captain. And he's, just you take care of all of the army stuff. And Joab was over the army. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. And so, he had the recorder who was documenting all the things that were happening in the kingdom. Zodek, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abathar, were the priests. And so they had those that were doing the sacrifices and, the worship of God. And they were given that responsibility. And then Sariah was the scribe. And the scribe would be the one who was, copying and directing all of these things. And then Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both of the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. And, you don't hear that about Saul's kingdom. So it was all about Saul. David now is organizing. He's giving responsibilities to all these different men in order to expand the kingdom. It wasn't about David. David was just, overseeing the responsibilities given to him, but he was also distributing those responsibilities to other men. And Saul never once, all you have is Saul's commander and then Saul. But now David is kind of starting to organize and give responsibilities to these other men as the kingdom is being expanded. Now, we come to chapter 9. Now, it's an interesting chapter because chapter 8 is really establishing David as the king of Israel, the king of the whole nation. And in this picture, you really have a picture of Christ. Throughout the prophecies that were given to David, he says, I'm going to establish your throne forever, and your son is going to sit on that throne forever and ever. And it was looking forward to Jesus. It wouldn't be long before a king was no longer ruling in Jerusalem. They're going to all be taken into captivity. And you're going, what happened? I thought David was supposed to have a king sitting on the throne forever. But now there's no kingdom and there's no king. Because he wasn't referring to the earthly king. He was referring to the heavenly king, Jesus, that would come on the scene. And all of the prophets understood that. All of them were saying, like King David ruled over Jerusalem, there's going to be a king and he's going to rule over the nations. And throughout the scriptures, every time they were in despair, they would remember God promised us a king that's going to rule over us, and he's going to be the king of righteousness. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 23, Jeremiah is written when the children of Israel are being taken into captivity. In the 23rd chapter, in verse 5, it says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise up to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper, execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. Now this is his name by which he'll be called, the Lord our righteousness. Guys, that's a reference to only one. No one else can take the name, the Lord our righteousness. You see, Jesus is our righteousness. It's because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross that you and I can be declared righteous. So he's our righteousness. And so you have all of these Old Testament prophets that were looking forward to that time when, David's kingdom would be reestablished like it's being established here in chapter 8. They were longing for that day when that king would come and he would set up a kingdom and that he would reign, and it would be a perfect reign. It would be a righteous reign that he would, establish. It was in the book of Hosea, chapter 3, verse 4, it says this, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king or a prince. without sacrifice or sacred pillars, without ephod or teraphim. Afterwards, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall fear the Lord and his goodness. Check this out. In the latter days. And anytime the Bible makes a reference to the latter days, he's talking about the end of times. You see, they would be longing and seeking for the Lord their God and for David their king. And so David becomes a type of Jesus in the Old Testament. And if David becomes a type of Jesus, this next chapter, I think, is a type of you and I. Because we're going to be introduced to a man by the name of Mephibosheth. And don't say that 3 times fast. Mephibosheth. This guy is an interesting character. Because I think there's some, again, very clear types here, very clear illustration here as we look at the life of Mephibosheth. Now, what you need to know about Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan. Jonathan and David had a bond. They were both great men of faith. The problem was what Jonathan was Saul's boy. And Jonathan knew that David was the rightful heir to the throne, even though he was second in command. He was the one that would have replaced his dad had dad died. And he knew it wasn't him. He knew it was David because this was what God had done. This is what God had declared. And Jonathan ends up dying in the battle with his dad, Saul, and all of his brothers, family members, all killed in the battle against the Philistines. And it's interesting that we were just kind of introduced to Mephibosheth in chapter 4, just a couple chapters ago. It was just a very short little blurb there. And then let me read it to you. 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. It says, Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and he fled. And it happened as she made haste to flee that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth, 5 years old. When the news comes that grandpa is dead, dad's dead, and the kingdom of Israel is without a leader. And in that day, if you were an heir to the throne, the first thing that would happen is you would go and find all of the those who were in that lineage of the heir, and if you were a new king coming, you would wipe out the whole family tree. That way there was never a threat again of having someone claiming the right to be the rightful king. And so the first thing they did is he got five-year-old Mephibosheth. His nurse grabs him, thinking, man, we got to hide him. We got to run. And as they're running, she falls and she lands on little Mephibosheth, and his legs, both of them, break. Lame, can never walk again. Broken, fallen. Imagine at that point, the nurse picks him up and continues running. And here he is with 2 little broken legs, poor little guy just, being swept away. Mom, knowing that dad's dead and grandpa's dead and probably all the other uncles are dead and, everyone else in the lineage already dead. And here's little Mephibosheth. Now, what's interesting in this picture is that David and Jonathan had made a covenant. David and Jonathan knew that David would one day become the king. And back in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 42, it says, Jonathan said to David, go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, may the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. So he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And it was there that Jonathan and David part ways. And the last, covenant, the last, conversation, they're going to meet again when Saul is chasing David. They meet again in the wilderness, and it says that Jonathan strengthened David in the Lord, his God. But this being the last time in Jerusalem that they actually have a conversation, and the conversation was something like this: look, no matter what happens, man, you take care of my kids, and if something happens to you, I'll take care of your family. And now, David is sitting back in his power. The kingdom finally subdued, finally in strength. He's there just kind of pondering back on everything that had happened, probably missing Jonathan. Thinking, Jonathan was supposed to be by my side, and, he didn't make it. Jonathan was supposed to be my right-hand man, and just in fondness and memory, just kind of thinking back, and he remembers the covenant that had been declared. Notice chapter 9. We'll jump in. He says, and David said, is there still anyone who's left in the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness, watch this, for Jonathan's sake? Because is there any relatives that made it? Anyone that's still alive in Saul's house? Because I want to keep my promise. And he begins to seek out. And I think David becoming a type of Christ, and you and I becoming that type of Mephibosheth. Think about this, guys. God is the one who seeks us out. You didn't find him, he found you. You were the lost sheep. He's the one who left the 99 to run after and to pull you out of the despair and the trouble you're in. And just like David here, he's seeking out, who's left, who can I show kindness to? And watch this. Look at verse 2. And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So they had called him to David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, at your service. Now, I obviously never met before, hey, there's a guy named Ziba. He'll know if there's any of Jonathan's, family members or Saul's family members left. And he, Ziba comes to him and goes, you're Ziba? He goes, yeah, I'm Ziba. Now, it's interesting. I don't think it's a good name to name your kid Ziba. Just some of these names in the Bible, you just go, where did they get them? But look at verse 3. The king said, is there not still someone in the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, there's still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet. Now, David's desire was to show the kindness of God to Mephibosheth. And the question comes, what does that mean? The kindness of God, what does that look like? And whatever that is, David is declaring, I want God's favor. I want God's kindness to fall on this young man, Saul's boy. And then check this out. Look at verse 4. So the king said, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo Debar. The interesting thing is he's hiding out. He's not in the position of, a place that that royalty should be. He's in Lodabar. Lodabar, I don't think there's any coincidences in Scripture. Lodabar, the literal meaning of Lodabar is without pasture. Without pasture. I mean, he's there just kind of pinned up. Just kind of, without anywhere to go, without anything to do. And here's Mephibosheth, and he just kind of there in Lodabar, not where he was supposed to be, not where he was destined to be. He just there, in this place where there was no pasture at all. Remember what David would write in Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He shall lead me into the green pastures. Right? The whole picture of a pasture is where you have freedom, you have substance, you have protection. This is where you're able to thrive. And Mephibosheth is somewhere where he's just kind of imprisoned. And I think why it's a type of us is that all of us find ourselves in the very same place until we find the kindness of God in our life. We're just kind of living through life lame and broken and fallen. Living through life without any purpose, without any direction. You can't really prosper. You can't thrive. You can have all the success of what the world offers, but you never find rest for the soul. You never find the purpose for your life. And here's Mephibosheth, lame. He can't even walk. He has no ability to get around. He's dependent upon everyone else to do so for him. And it's interesting that it tells us in verse 5, then King David, check this out, sent and brought him out of the house of Micah, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. And when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face. He prostrated himself. And David said, Mephibosheth? And he said, here is your servant. Can you imagine what's Mephibosheth even thinking at this point? I'm the only son. I'm the only heir in Saul's house. I mean, what does David want from me? Is he going to kill me? Am I done? Is it over? Why would David even want to see me? I mean, look at me. I have nothing. I have no ability. I'm just a lame man. And as he comes to David, it says he fell on his face. It's an act of submission, an act of my life is in your hands. It's a life of I have nothing. But he prostrates himself right there and just like, here I am. And I love how David responds to him. And I think, when David says Mephibosheth, I would imagine that he said it tenderly. It wasn't something like Mephibosheth. I don't think that was it at all. I think it was Mephibosheth. And then he turns to him and he says, do not fear. And the only reason you tell somebody do not fear is because it had to be fear that was just permeating from Mephibosheth's face, from his countenance. And he says, dude, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And I think sometimes when it comes to, our relationship with God, I think sometimes we see God and it's almost like, what would God want anything to do with me? And even in some responding, I just kind of keep my distance from God because he's so grand or so holy that I just kind of cower and fear away from him. And that was never God's intent. I mean, think about what he's saying. I want to show you the kindness of God. And the first thing he says, do not fear. And God is never desiring. Now, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And that fear is a reverence of God. Not a fear as in, you're shaking or thinking that God's going to strike you, or you have some kind of got some vendetta against you. That's not the fear that God wants you to have. He wants you to have an awe of him, a reverence of him, an acknowledgement of who he is. But never a fear as in you tremble because of fear. And the first thing that David says is, do not fear. And I like the second thing he says, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan, your father's sake. He goes, I got your best interest at heart. I want to show you the kindness on behalf of your dad. I imagine at this point, just explaining to him how much his dad meant to him, how his dad was also a great man of faith, and your dad was special to me, and he wanted him to to understand that I got your good at heart, I got your best at heart, I got everything that's prosperous for you at heart. And as a matter of fact, that's the very next thing he says. Look, for I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather. You have an inheritance. You have an inheritance, and I'm not here to take your inheritance. I'm here to give you your inheritance. And I don't know if you realize this, but you and I have an inheritance because of what Jesus Christ did on the cross for us. We have the promise that we're going to be with him and be the beneficiaries of what he did on our behalf. I think all this analogy, Mephibosheth, that many times, I come to God and I'm just like, God, I don't deserve any of it. I just like, why would you even want me? I mean, I don't have anything to offer you. I'm so messed up. I'm so far. It just, there's God. Don't fear. I want you to know my kindness. You have an inheritance with me. I mean, all of these benefits that God provides, and we did nothing to deserve it. Did nothing to earn it. Matter of fact, that what we deserved was the opposite of it. God's wrath, God's judgment. And God in his goodness, and God in his favor and his kindness, he provides for us everything that we didn't deserve. And he gives us, the inheritance with him. And then it tells us at the end of that, look at this, and you, look at this, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. Because I'm going to give you all of the land that Saul had, all of Saul's personal property, all of his house, all of his farms, and all of it, the land that he had accumulated as being a king. I'm going to give it all back to you, Jonathan. It's your, Mephibosheth, it's all yours. But here's the deal. You're going to sit at my table forever. You're going to eat your dinners, your breakfast, your lunch with me. Well, what a picture. What a picture of God's goodness and God's favor toward his children. And this wasn't even his son. He was adopted. He was grafted into this. Everything he deserved was to be slaughtered because he was the next in line to the reign of Saul. And anyone who wanted to bring up Saul's kingdom again, he would have been the one who they elevated into that position or to that place. It would have been the right thing for David to kill him. But David wanted to show him the kindness of God. He wanted to give him an inheritance. And then he says, from now on, you eat with me. I mean, I don't think it was anything Mephibosheth was expecting at all. I don't think it was anything that Mephibosheth even thought was going to go down that day. Notice, look at verse 8. And then he, that's Mephibosheth, bowed himself and he said, what is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? He goes, what? I didn't deserve any of this. I'm just a dead dog. That's how he saw himself. All of his shame, all of his inabilities, all of his dependence upon everyone else to sustain him. And he goes, I'm just a nobody. I'm just a nothing. I mean, why are you doing this? You ever feel that way when you think about how God has demonstrated his love toward you? God, why would you want me? I don't have nothing. I have nothing. All I did was ever fail. All I've done is hop along. I can't even walk right. I can't even live right. I can't even do the things that I'm supposed to be doing right in your eyes. And yet you still show me the favor. You're still giving me the. I mean, what's up with that? It's called grace. You see, grace is simply this: God's undeserved, unmerited, unearned favor. And that's what David is showing Mephibosheth. God's unearned, undeserved favor. And you need to know that's how God views you. The moment that you bow your knee and acknowledge that I'm guilty, I'm a sinner, I don't deserve anything from God. And at that very moment, God says, you know what, you're a son. You're going to eat at my table every day from now on. You're going to be hanging out with me. Matter of fact, I'm going to come and live inside of you. I mean, how mind-boggling is that? That the God of all creation says, I'm going to take my abode. I'm going to now dwell inside your heart, and I'm going to live inside your life. And everywhere you go, I go with you. Everything you do, I'm going to be with you. And it's exactly this picture that we look at. David setting up his kingdom, and then here's the first thing that happens is Mephibosheth comes along. And all of this transpires as Mephibosheth goes, I'm just a dog. I'm just and not even a dog. He didn't even call himself a dog. I'm a dead dog. How much lower can you get than that? A dead dog. You call yourself a dog, that's one thing. But a dead dog's more worthless than a dog. And so he understood, who he was. And then look at verse 8. And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and he said to him, I have given your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all of his house. You, therefore, and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him. You shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so your servant will do. And as for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who dwelt in his house, in the house of Ziba, were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, and he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both of his feet. And you have this picture, in this whole passage, and it's quite interesting that 4 times in this passage, there in verse 7, in verse 10, in verse 11, in verse 13, he reminds them, and you're going to be eating at my table continually. You're going to be eating at my table, at every meal. You're going to be sitting with the king's sons. And over again, he's telling them, look, this is your new position. This is how it's going to be from here forward. And you and I, put ourselves in the very same position that this young man puts himself in. Because you and I have been adopted into the family of God. The moment you've bowed your knee and you said, God, I give, I surrender. I want you to be my Lord. We come and we just acknowledge that I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I'm just a lame dead dog, and only God can rescue me. Only God can provide for me. Only God can protect me. And at that very moment, man, God changes your position from an enemy to a son. From someone who was, opposing him to someone who now is part of a family. In the book of 1 John chapter 3, it says this, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called the children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God. And it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. I love that passage. Because it wraps up so much of, what God's done now immediately, and what he's going to do, in the time to come. He tells us there that God's bestowed the love of the Father on us. He's bestowed on us that we should be called the children of God. I mean, what a picture. That's hard for me to even wrap my mind around, that God looks at me as one of his own sons. He sees you as his own daughter. And then he goes on and he says, look, we don't even know what's coming yet. We can't even wrap our mind around what God has in store. He says, but we know this, when Jesus is revealed, we're going to be like him. What does that mean? We're going to be like him. We're going to take on his body, the glorified body. I think that's implied there. Remember when Jesus came back after the resurrection, he was walking through walls. Would just be in one place. The next moment he's in the next place. And he was just this new creation, this new body that he's demonstrating. He says, we're going to be like him. I mean, what is that going to look like? You're going to have a new body. It's going to be a glorious body. And then he tells us over and over again that we're going to be with him forever and ever and ever. There's an interesting passage in John chapter 14. It was when Jesus was telling his disciples, look, I'm about to leave. And Peter stands up and he goes, Lord, I'll die with you. You're not going anywhere, and he's ready to fight. And Jesus says, Peter, you can't go with me now. And then in chapter 14, he says, let your heart not be troubled. Don't fear. Isn't it the same thing that David told Mephibosheth? Don't fear. Let your heart not be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again, I'll receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also, and where I go you know, and the way you know. I mean, I'm going to go add a room to my dad's house so you can live with us. Because in my Father's house there are many mansions. And we're going to be living in the King's house. I don't know, what is that going to look like? We're going to be eating at the King's table. King Jesus. And it was all because of his grace. Nothing that we earned or deserved. It wasn't because we did certain things. And, now you earned it. Now you deserve it. None of it. It was all because of what he did on our behalf. It's interesting that Jonathan was a beneficiary of a covenant that was made before he was ever born. Isn't that a cool picture? Jonathan benefited from a covenant that before he even existed had taken place. And that's the same for you and I. We're benefiting from a covenant that took place before you were ever on the scene. As Jesus hung on a cross and with his own blood offered up himself on your behalf and on my behalf. And it's just an amazing analogy here that Mephibosheth from this point forward, think about it. Mephibosheth, the lame guy, he couldn't even protect himself. Now he's living in the king's house. He's got protection 24/7. He couldn't even go work the ground, to make his own food. He's got servants that are working the ground for him, and now he doesn't have to worry about his food because he's sitting at the king's table eating with the king. His provisions, his protection, his substance, everything provided for him because of the favor of God upon his life. And I think that this is probably one of my favorite chapters in the life of David, because you see in it the grace of God, and as David becomes a man after God's own heart. I think here it's on display like nowhere else in the Old Testament. I don't think it's in display anywhere else, for sure in the life of David. You get this picture of what a man after God's own heart looks like. That tells us that this is what God's heart looks like. That God shows favor when we don't deserve it. We didn't earn it. And maybe you walk in, you're just going, man, God, I feel so far from you. I feel so distant from you. I failed you again. I don't know if you'd even want me back ever again. And we can just listen to all of the condemnation and all of our failure, and let that dictate how we're going to live our life. Or you can come and say, God, I believe what you say. I didn't deserve it. I know I didn't deserve it. I didn't earn it. There's no way I could have earned it. I'm just a dead dog. But God, you said that if I would surrender to you, that I would be your son, that I'd be your daughter. God, I want nothing more than that in my life than for me to be one of yours. That I would get all the benefits of being in a position of royalty. And it's there for the taking. It's there for anyone who would just humble themselves and say, God, I want it.